Thank you, Karen. So without further ado, let's say hello and introduce our great panelists. And just a reminder to everyone watching, you can ask questions for the panelists in the live chat box, and a staff person will send those along. Let's go in alphabetical order. So if you can just introduce yourself, your name and pronouns, and we like to ask all of our guests, what's one thing you've learned while you've been in quarantine? And first up, it's going to be Amber.
Amber, you're muted.
Technology. I haven't learned technology in quarantine. So I'm Amber, and I prefer the female pronouns, she, her, hers. I've learned that I'm not a school teacher because I have young kids, a second and third grader that I've tried to school during this.
And if you could, since we're all from all over the state, if folks could also share where they're calling in from, I think that would be great.
Okay, I live in Pendleton. I've kind of lived all over. I was in the military, grew up in the middle of nowhere, Utah. It's quite rural there as well. So Pendleton is home for me. And
Thank you. Next up is Claire.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Claire Hall. I'm calling from Newport, where I've lived since 1987. I have been a Lincoln County Commissioner since 2005, and since 2018, 2 years ago last month, my pronouns have been she, her, hers. I came out as a transgender woman and have been continuing to serve in office ever since.
Thank you. Next up is Pam. Oh, sorry, I went out of order. Kylan, sorry.
No worries. Hi, folks. I'm Kylene Defriese. I use he or they pronouns. I am in Ashland, Oregon, and for those that you don't know, it is about 14 miles from the California border. I've been here for 10 years. I grew up in Vancouver, Canada, so this is the smallest place I've lived, so it's been interesting living in a rural area. And I guess one thing I've learned is I'm a little bit more, or becoming a little bit more tech savvy than I was, which isn't necessarily saying much, but I'm definitely developing those skills during quarantine.
Thank you. And now next up is Pam.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pam Trezevant, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm originally from Columbia, South Carolina, but I've been living in Salem, Oregon for the last 15 plus years. And I am the former president of Capitol Pride. I served in that capacity for like 6 years and put on the Capitol Pride here in Salem, Oregon. And let's see, a little bit about what I've learned since quarantine is that my dogs are my coworkers and they get to sleep all day, and it's very, very upsetting because I have to work while they're taking naps all day long.
I can understand that. Next up, we have Rob.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rob Landis. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am calling in today from Bend, Oregon. I actually live in Prineville, and that's a population slightly over 10,000. I was born and raised in Prineville. Something I've learned from the whole COVID situation we're in is how much of a role that social interaction plays with mental health, and how important it is that we still find ways to connect one another.
Thank you.
All right, and my understanding is that the feed didn't actually go live right when we thought it did. So it looks like folks who are watching from home saw all of the introductions of our wonderful guests, but didn't hear Todd and I talk about what we're doing today and why we're here. So I think we're going to jump back and just redo that introduction really quickly. My name's Kieran Chase. I am the manager of the Transgender Justice Program at Basic Rights Oregon, and I use gender-neutral pronouns, they, them, and theirs.
And I'm Todd Adams. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the deputy director at Basic Rights Oregon.
You know, it's full summer, and it certainly doesn't feel the same way as other years have felt due to COVID and also just the continued fight for racial justice that's been happening in the streets. And typically during this time, we'd be traveling all over the state, celebrating Pride with all of the rural communities that have such vibrant and thriving LGBTQ folks who are represented, a small portion of whom are represented on this call today. So instead, we're connecting with you all online. We've been doing these virtual queer town halls weekly since about April, and we're just so excited to hear from rural communities about their work for LGBTQ equality.
Yeah, Kieran and I both grew up in rural areas, so it's definitely something we hold close to our hearts. I grew up in West Virginia, and I love hearing from other LGBTQ folks who grew up in similar rural communities. I first came out in 1994, maybe 1995, while still in high school. And the only other gay person I knew in real life was my cousin. And the only queer folks I really knew of out in the real world were Melissa Etheridge and Katie Lang, and they seemed really far away and inaccessible. It wasn't until I went to college that I really had anything resembling a community. And if you think a gay community in a city can be cliquey, you've never experienced anything like a college town in a rural environment. So it's a lot of like having a lot of little communities that have a lot of overlap.
Yeah, and sort of similarly, I grew up in rural western Nebraska, really far from Omaha. Everyone always asks if I was close to Omaha. I was 8 hours to drive away from Omaha. I was in a town where there was a rumor that one of my classmates had two moms, and that was just a topic that was whispered about. I remember all through my childhood that was something we would like whisper about. And then I was actually outed myself when I was in middle school, and I was the only out LGBTQ kid that anyone in my community knew. I think about this story a lot, that one of those two moms actually found me at a middle school basketball game and said, "Oh, I've heard about you. Keep your head up. You have nothing to be ashamed of." And that's the story that I tell and that I think about when people ask me why we need pride. We need pride for so many reasons. And one of those reasons, the one that's closest to my heart, is that there are LGBTQ young folks all over this country who need someone to tell them that they have nothing to be ashamed of, that in fact, they should have pride in who they are. So I'm just so stoked to hear from this panelists who have now heard this whole run through twice. I hope it's been fun for you all. But without further ado, I think we're going to just jump into questions. Our first question is for our County Commissioner, Claire Hall. So you are Oregon's only out transgender elected official. What are the positive effects that you think your position has for LGBTQ folks in your community?
Okay, well, first, if I could preface this a little bit, and I am no longer the only out transgender official. Actually, we have another out LGBTQ official, CM Hall, who I think will be known to a lot of people in activism. I know she used to work for Basic Rights Oregon, and in 2018, she was elected to the Newport City Council. Right now on the Walport City Council, there is a member named Karen Virtue. A couple of years, she was assigned male at birth. A couple of years ago, she announced that she was non-binary. And then about a year ago, she said, no, I'm a transgender woman, adopted she, her, hers pronouns. and the name of Karen. And I think we've got a wonderful phenomenon going here, because I've got another friend, Marcy Grace Frederick. She started a coastal support group, Central Oregon Coast Transgender Community, and she is going to file to run for the Toledo City Council. So, I just think this is, in some ways an amazing and wonderful phenomenon, although, I grew up in Portland, came here in 1987, and I find some of my old Portland friends and family say, well, how can you do that in such a conservative community? But really, Lincoln County is not all that conservative. We have had people, I think especially I would call kind of upscale progressive retirees coming here for 20, 30 years. There is, and even among some of the old timers, it's, kind of a wonderful live and let live sort of attitude. I mean, I've had, I loved it when a 80-something woman I've known for 30 years came up to me, said, "Can I give you a hug?" And she said, and I said, "Of course." And she said, "I am so glad I've lived to see a time where this is possible." And I said, "Barbara, I am too." But, there's also a lot of people who kind of have said, well, gee, I really don't begin to understand this, but if this is what brings you happiness, peace of mind, and as long as you continue to do the job well, and you seem to be, then I've got no problem with it. So, it has been really, a lot of, a great experience. I recently, for the third time, had someone come up to me and say, well, gee, your story, your example has helped give me courage to transition myself. And that is just so deeply humbling to me as well.
Gosh, thank you so much, Claire. Note to self, when I'm ready to have transgender people represent me in my city government, I should just move to the Central Oregon coast.
Definitely.
Where I hear that it was 66 degrees today, so it is a much stronger possibility than it was like an hour ago.
Of course, remind everybody that the downside is about 5 months of steady rain in the winter, but I think, we consider it a good trade-off because that's what makes it so lush and green here in the summer months.
Sounds idyllic. I want to jump to Kylan. So Kylan, you have helped create the nation's first transgender studies certificate at a university, which is going to be offered at Southern Oregon University down in Ashland, 14 miles from the California border. I want to hear more about what spurred you to take on this groundbreaking effort. What kind of things were going on in your community that pushed this forward and made it happen?
Yeah, we are really excited about that. So, one thing we've seen, we've been getting calls from our community asking for trainings around trans issues. And that's been happening for a while, and we've done some trainings. And so the question sort of arose, well, if we keep doing these trainings in our community, it represents a need. So why don't we have more classes for our students? And we've been slowly adding trans-related classes, particularly around like sort of histories, thinking about social movements, thinking about health and well-being. And I guess it was about 1.5 years ago that we started having conversations with folks about what could they contribute. So while I am the only trans person teaching this, we do have people who are experts in the area. And so one example I want to give is we have someone from Native American Studies, Dr. Brooke Colley, who's going to teach an Indigenous decolonizing trans class, which I think is fantastic and not offered very often. We'll have one around trans literature. We'll have stuff within gender, sexuality, women's studies about like histories, thinking about social institutions, the prison industrial complex, thinking about healthcare. So we are we're a small school, and so it's going to be a certificate that has to be done over 2 years just because of how often we can offer those classes. But other than looking at some international programs that offer programs specifically around trans studies, we'll be the first. And so we're hoping that this will give a chance for students already at SOU, but those who already have careers who want to come back and get the certificate, a chance to sort of understand trans lives from a different perspectives, and then be able to take that into their careers. And I guess what I'll add is, in our rural context, I think it's really interesting. We're in a blue state. We have some pretty progressive laws around trans issues and trans rights, and yet I'm sure other people are going to talk about this. Being in a rural area, access is a big problem, right? And some of these policies aren't getting implemented in our community. And so the more we can do to educate folks, the more likely those services are going to be able to be offered here versus having to go up to Eugene or Portland or down to Sacramento.
Amazing, thank you.
Thank you so much. Our next question is for Pam. Pam, you're the former director of Capital Pride in Salem. What are some of the unique things about the LGBT community in Salem that made putting on the event special to you?
Well, thank you for the question, Todd. When I first moved here, where I was working, we got a little bit involved, and it was just a small event held in a small park in Salem and behind the Walmart. And I never forget going over there, and it was really, really, it was a big deal because we still wanted to have it, but it was very small. And as time went on, it grew, and they started asking for more sponsorships. And I was able to get my company to help out with that a little bit. And we changed our planning and the way we would ask for funding, and we increased the funding. But what I found interesting, like a lot of people, I like to think that, do we still need Pride? Is it still, important to have this festival every year? Portland has a big one. We can just all go to Portland and have that moment and have that weekend, and it'll be, that's good. But what I found is that Salem's Pride, I had a lot of people come down and they would work the Pride, and other folks that started joining in, different companies, and people were having such a good time because it was families. It was okay to bring their kids and to bring their pets and just to sit in the lawn. And the last couple of years, I don't know if any of you came through Salem Pride, but we had Darcel in the house, and Darcel with Poison Waters and that whole crew just turned our event on his head, and we had great entertainment. But while we had a lot of fun, small community, great turnout, great people and people in the area coming to join us, what I would always hear from someone was that, and you mentioned earlier, some other folks talked about the young people, and somebody would come up and say, this is just awesome. This is just great. I wasn't able to come out, or I see coworkers here. I see friends here. They saw people that they didn't know about, or, people that they work with. And it was all in good spirit. And people that came out, enjoyed themselves, had a good time in the park, and people were learning things. I always heard stories from different people when that event was over. And they were always positive stories about what they took away from the day. And that always reminded me that this event was important. And while I may be out and living my life, there's a lot of people that still need these small town events to make themselves feel welcome and able to come out and enjoy that day. So that's, we're in the capital city, but it's still small. It's the capital of Oregon, but it still was a small event. But the event has gotten bigger over the years with a lot of support, a lot of community, businesses, and everyone coming out. And the event has just, I'm hating that this year they're not able to do the regular event, but I'm sure they'll get it back in 2021, and it'll keep going strong.
Absolutely.
Amazing. I want to lift up that experience that you mentioned of getting to see people at Pride. I where I grew up, there was no Pride festival happening. They had their first Pride event actually about 3 summers ago, long after I had left home. And I, in the last few years, have seen in my Facebook feed people from my hometown posting pictures and comments and stories about attending that event. And I was like, you would have been with me? You would have supported me? I had no idea, right? It's just such an amazing feeling to like show up at one of these like community events in a place that sometimes there's hostility, or sometimes folks are still in a process of learning, and getting to really like see that, yes, my community is with me. I don't have to run away to a city to find people who will love and support me. I think that's such a powerful part of these small local prides. Amber, you've been involved with Pendleton's PFLAG for about a decade, and one thing we know is that PFLAG chapters really like hold down the fort in small towns all over the state and all over the country. I'd love to hear a little bit about what you enjoy about being part of Pendleton's PFLAG and LGBTQ community. What makes that special for you?
Well, it was I joined the Pendleton PFLAG right when I moved here, because I'd lived up in Shelton, Washington, and so I had a trans support group that I'd always gone to in Tacoma, the Gender Alliance of South Sound, and it really helped me come to better accept myself. And so when I got to Pendleton, I was looking, there's got to be something, and PFLAG's the only thing that I could find. And so they've embraced me, welcomed me. It's been a lot of fun. They're like, we're not sure about trans issues, so there's been a lot of education going on there with PFLAG, and it's kind of like, all right, I know you guys are friendly and supportive, but yeah, let's kind of try not to do this, or try to be respectful of this and that. So there's been a lot of growth in the Pendleton PFLAG chapter. I've been very fortunate in Pendleton that I haven't had too many issues and all of that. So it's been a lot of fun to have a group that's supportive. They've watched my kids grow up, because it's been 13 years since I moved to Pendleton, so just over a decade, and my kids are 8 and 9, so they've kind of grown up in PFLAG and all part of that. So it's been a lot of fun.
I love that community energy. Pendleton's PFLAG is a powerhouse. One time we did a training out there in Pendleton. I think, Amber, that's actually where I met you a couple of years ago. And I remember at that training there was a gentleman in the audience who asked a really pretty like harmful and offensive question in the middle of the training. But and PFLAG, the folks at PFLAG were on it. They jumped in. They excused him from the training. They had a long one-on-one conversation with him and just did all the work that I did not have the capacity to do standing at the front of the room. And it was so powerful. So I hear you on that education piece is still there, but really having them have your back like that, I'm sure it's been really powerful.
It has been, and I've seen them go to bat for other people in the county that is quite huge, and be able to just back them up and go to city council meetings and everything else to help and support the LGBT community.
Thank you so much for that. Our next question is for Rob. You're from the Bend Prineville area. Like some of our other guests, that's often an area of our state that's treated as a destination by folks. It's a tourist area, a community with a lot of tourism that people pop into and out of, and has a lot of seasonal residents and employees that go there. How does that play into the sense of community in Bend and the sense of pride?
Well, I think that you're right. There is a lot of tourists that come through here, especially Bend. But within the last 8 years, I've seen some huge changes happening with local business owners. The community as a whole, I feel like, sorry, dog just freaked out. The community has been very accepting, and they've been starting to put out little pride stickers on business windows. that say you are welcome here. So they've been distributed all over town. I've noticed a huge increase in public restrooms, changing their signage so that it is gender neutral restrooms everywhere. And every time there's been something Pride related, I feel like there's a huge support from the community, not just LGBTQ+, but also all of the allies that are around here. It's been huge.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So cool.
Did you want me to expand on that, or?
If you have more to say, please say it.
Well, I could mention the recent, in June on the 28th, Prineville had what we called Prideville, and we did a march. Because it is COVID-19 year, we did have to kind of limit the attendance and kind of keep our space as we marched, but we did have giant pride flags, and we marched through the town of Prineville, and we received nothing but supportive honks and waves from the community of people that were driving by, which was, it almost brought a tear to my eye because it was so moving, it was so emotional in a town that I was born and raised in. I did not expect that much of a reception, and it was a beautiful moment to take part in. Of course, we want to do that in future years where we're not having to limit the attendance and the social distancing and all that stuff. But just to kind of blaze the trail, it was huge.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think folks in cities kind of take that massive show of support for granted, but it can just be such a stunning and welcome surprise that it's touching in a whole different way. I hear you. I have gone to a couple of first ever prides in my tenure at Basic Rights, and it's always just I am not ashamed to say that I have sobbed, sobbed all the way home. All right, we got a question from the audience. Thanks for submitting this. This comes from Christy. It says, as a leader in the community, we need to create safe spaces virtually for our youth to connect and support one another. I think this question was intended for Amber and Kylan, but I imagine others might have thoughts and want to join in. So the question is, so this person's the Oregon PTA president and wants to know how we can create a safe space. I'm not going to call on you. You just have to start talking.
We just have to start talking. I just think that it's very important to that the kids know that they have someone that they can reach out to and be willing to talk to it, and maybe have some of the counselors that can talk to it. The only problems my kids have ever had is somebody was on the bus one day said, don't be gay. And they're like, well, what's wrong with being gay? I've got two moms. And it was reassuring to know that there was counselors there at the school that they could talk to and be able to reassure my children that everything's okay.
Yeah, and I think there's a question about how can we take that kind of support and transfer it to this virtual environment that we find ourselves in and that our kiddos might be in for the next however many months. So further thoughts from folks. I think I saw Kylan had some ideas.
Well, I don't know about ideas. I think Chrissy, this is a really timely question, at least in our area. So we had a youth organization that didn't address the virtual stuff. It was a Lotus Rising project that closed. And so one of the things that a local nonprofit is doing, Rogue Action Coalition, they're doing a survey of LGBTQ folks in our area to see the needs and do a needs assessment. And I think about how we don't really have some great resources particularly for youth. I know at Southern Oregon University, there was just an announcement that we're going to go back to remote learning for the fall instead of in person. And there's conversations between us and also the Queer Resource Center about thinking about how do we create community in these virtual spaces. So I don't necessarily have an answer to that, but it's conversations that are happening right now. And I think they're important conversations, not just because of this pandemic, but the likelihood that this is going to happen again. And so if we can create that space now and learn from that, then we'll be better able to apply that. And I think particularly for rural areas. Then there's issues with access to the internet and technology. But even that aside, having those virtual spaces can be really beneficial for folks who can't necessarily come out of their community, right? And whatever those spaces are, I think are really important.
I want to mention that if folks on the call mention a resource or something that's available online that you know of, if you mention it, our incredible communications wizard, Liz, will drop that into the comments for folks to be able to access. So it's just a note as we move through. Other thoughts on this question? How do we create virtual safe spaces?
Yeah, I guess I could do a little plug here for Prideville. We started up a private Facebook group. It does entail answering a few security questions in order to be accepted by admin in order to get into it. And it has grown exponentially since we had our Prideville March. And the community originally was started for support for the youth in Central Oregon, specifically Prineville, Oregon. And it's taken off, and we've gained so many more people within the group, not just within the teens, but also adults that needed support in Prineville, because it is a very rural kind of redneck country town, and there's a lot of people that don't feel safe or comfortable with being out. So it does help everybody kind of get a sense of community and meet other people in their town without having to go out in town and out themselves. So we have tried to see how that goes with this digital coronavirus age that we're in right now. So that is something that's working for us so far to kind of build the LGBTQ plus community in Prineville.
That's awesome. I want to mention to folks, we ran a queer town hall several weeks ago, I think during the month of June, though it may have been May, that was focused on youth. You can find it on our YouTube channel, recorded. We had a bunch of folks who work with youth across a whole range of sort of agencies and organizations. And we had some former foster youth, et cetera, who who shared a ton of resources for supporting youth during COVID. And I would absolutely suggest taking a look at that. Any final thoughts on this question? If not, I'll let Todd take the next one.
Thank you, Kieran. Our next question is one for everyone. So in the city, people usually think of Pride as being a week-long or even a month-long event that might have a parade or movie festivals or theme nights at nightclubs. We both, Kieran and I, have experience in rural areas where Pride and community shows up in different ways. That there might not be a parade at all. The nearest gay bar might be an hour, 3 hours, 8 hours away. But community might show up in different ways. It might show up around the softball championship that's in town, or the rodeo, or a barbecue that pops up around somebody who's just come round to visit. What are some of the unique ways that community and Pride shows up in your community that folks in the city might not even think about? You can feel free to jump in, but if nobody jumps in, I will call on you.
I can jump in. We in Prineville, there is a local brewery that is open to the public with children. Even kids can be in there until 9 p.m. I think. They just can't sit at the bar. But in the back of this facility, it's called Crooked River Brewing, and they have a little movie room in the back, and they have teamed up with our PFLAG of Prineville, and they do gay movie nights where they play some film like they did one night. They did the Birdcage, and they just invited whoever wanted to attend, and the PFLAG supplied pizza and soda and stuff like that. And I noticed that there were places throughout the bar that had little cup holders that had a pride flag, proudly waiting for all of the other patrons to see that there was some gay night going on there. So the owners of that establishment are super supportive, and I think it's a great place in Prineville that is very accepting of Prineville LGBTQ plus people and visitors.
Awesome, thank you.
I can mention the Pride in Ashland, Oregon. So one thing that's different is we do Pride around National Coming Out Day in October, and that's because the students are back. The university students become very central in Pride, and it's draws people from around Southern Oregon and even Northern California.
Here in Pendleton, it's mostly PFLAG that does a lot of everything. I know as we start, at least in the past, it was always they'd have a potluck in the fall. There's a Christmas potluck, and that's really where a lot of the support in Pendleton comes from is PFLAG.
In Salem, year after year, we've always had the help and support from the Speakeasy. So we have Southside Speakeasy, a club here that LGBTQ owned, and we'll have the after event there, and they allowed us to have all of our meetings there for free, free space for all of that. So that was always a great partnership. And we've done things like fundraisers there had drag queen bingo, just different things. So we've done, leading up to the event. And we always had the event here in August because we didn't want to compete with the other, everybody can't have. But like we said, Pride goes on all year long. So we didn't need to limit it to just 1 month. And so it was always great. And they would host the after party. So after Pride, you would always find not everyone, but a lot of people would go there. So it was a lot of community support. Everyone knew where to go after the event if they wanted to go out for some dancing and some fun after the event. So that's been going on for years, and I'm sure it will continue to go on in the future.
Excellent.
Amazing. I love the ways that we find to show up for each other. A general question for the group now. How can, this comes, I think, from someone living in an urban area. So how can people who live in urban areas signal boost rural LGBTQ events or organizing efforts? Or would you recommend that folks in urban areas should stay in their lane? I encourage you to be candid.
Well, hi, it's Claire. Could I jump in? Newport has never had a Pride event. Unfortunately, Yachats had one that seemed to be going well for a couple of years, but the organizers just kind of ran out of gas. There was a group working on a Pride weekend for Newport for September of this year, and you all know, unfortunately, COVID got in the way, but I think the energy is definitely still there, and at least I would think as just one member of the community here, energy, ideas from anywhere in the state, really anybody who has anything to contribute, I think that would be very welcomed myself.
Excellent. Thank you, Claire. Would anybody else have anything that they'd like to add to that?
I guess I would add too, because we're sort of a university town, we do have a lot of students from urban areas that come down and share their ideas. So I think it's more than welcome. I mean, we are kind of in the middle of nowhere. We're 3 hours from Eugene, 5 hours from Sacramento, 5 hours from Portland-ish. And so I think the more that we can bring people together, that's really the goal of Pride.
Further thoughts from folks? How can folks living in urban areas signal boost and support your organizing?
Well, we had Poison Waters come. They do a fundraiser for us every year, and I'm sure many of you know Poison Waters and have seen their awesome show. We have had them come to Bend every year for a fundraiser, and they've supported our community several times, and I love to see that support from the bigger cities.
Excellent. Awesome. Unless there are further closing thoughts about how folks can support y'all, it sounds like support is welcome. Yeah, I just want to like expand on this question a little bit. I know that a feeling that some folks have in rural areas, some of what I've heard, and this happens sometimes when Basic Rights Oregon comes in to do a training or a community event, there's this feeling that folks from the city are coming and sort of taking over or co-opting the work of rural communities. And I'm wondering if any of y'all could speak to sort of that feeling and how it can be avoided, or how folks who want to do this work and support rural communities can engage in ways that feel supportive of your work rather than sort of harmful or overrunning you.
I've always liked it when Bro or Basic Rights Oregon and all that came. There's not a whole lot that goes on here. Pendleton's very just Pendleton. I mean, the biggest thing we have is the roundup, and so there's not a lot of activities. As long as the leaders are informed of the organizations that are coming in, I think everything runs fairly smoothly.
Well, that's great to hear. Anyone else?
Yeah, I could just piggyback off of that. I agree that as long as there's communication with the organizers of the local community and there's full open communication, I think that we could all kind of coordinate in a friendly, productive manner that helps just everybody.
Yeah, and I think I agree with that, and I would also add that I think anytime an outside group is wanting to support a group in whatever they're doing, putting on Pride or whatever, it's so important to have that communication and so important to center that group's ideas and not bring one's own ideas and try to force that on them. So the more that you can center that community, the better it is.
Thank you so much. Seems like we're having a small technical problem at the moment.
But I think we can keep asking some questions. We definitely have a few folks still here. I have a question for Claire. I'm wondering, you've talked a little bit about it, but I'm wondering what is your favorite way to celebrate Pride on the Oregon coast? What's your favorite thing to do?
Oh, I think just gathering with people, whether they are members of the community themselves or allies, a positive spirit. My God, I had the chance to participate in the Portland Pride Parade a couple of years ago. That was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. But something else I treasure, being at Yacht's Pride last year, and a woman who I had never met coming up to me with her daughter, who I think was maybe about 11 years old, and wanting to introduce me. And that young lady was so beautiful. She was so shy. I mean, I'm not used to people feeling in awe of just meeting me. To me, I'm just a person, but it was pretty clear that I was somebody she really looked up to, that it meant an awful lot that here I was, a very visible person in the community. So, just kind of that spirit, a hopeful love, a positive spirit, loving spirit. To me, that's what Pride is all about. And whether it's happening in Portland or Yachts or any place of any size in between, it's just wonderful.
Amazing. I love your just like your energy that you bring to this. It's very like calming and loving, and I am really appreciating how much you clearly just love and care about your community. Todd, do we have you on the line still?
Yeah, I dropped off for a moment there.
Okay, great. I think you have the next question.
I do. My next question was for Pam. Do we have you back, Pam?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. I'm glad we sorted it out. So I know that you spoke so fondly of the process of organizing everything for Capitol Pride and how it grew and everything like that, and working with community partners to make that happen. Can you tell us a little bit about what it was like as it was going through that experience to reach out to all those community partners over time, and how it grew? You said that most people were really eager to work with you. Can you talk a little bit about how those relationships developed?
It was just my charming personality. Just kidding. But no,
I believe it.
To be honest, when it first started, when I was asked to do this and I stepped into that position, I was a little nervous about, I come out at work, I feel used to feel like every day, all the time. And so now I'm going out in the community and not knowing how people were going to react. It was a little bit scary, but I took the opportunity to people I met in different events, and that's the way I kind of made these connections. For instance, I was a speaker at Basic Rights Oregon Luncheon one year, a few years ago, and at that luncheon I met the regional director for Starbucks, who in turn she reached out to me, I reached out to her, we made a connection, they became a sponsor of Capitol Pride. So, just taking those events and those opportunities. And then I realized just being my authentic self and going out and letting people know what we were doing, why we were doing it, why it was important. And you found out you had more people with you than you had against you. You found out that people really cared. They knew other people, they had employees, they had just reasons that they wanted to get involved. So once I realized that you might get a couple no's, I was getting way more yeses. And it made my heart glad. It made, last year's event was almost not going to happen. And somebody mentioned Poison Waters, and she's the one that reached out to me and said, we got to make Capitol Pride happen again in 2019. And I said, okay, I'll do it one more year. I'll make this happen. And we stepped in, and it was a wonderful event. And we, because we have our corporate sponsors, we have just local sponsors. We have a lot of people that just want to get involved. So like I said, it takes its toll, but you find that it's a lot of people willing to help, and the community is just so nice and so willing to help. And they showed up and they participated. So it's been a great time.
Oh, good to hear. That's awesome.
Fantastic. Just a reminder to folks who are watching that if you submit a question or if you make a contribution to Basic Rights Oregon to help support our live captioning service for the Queer Town Hall, you'll be entered in a drawing to win a really nice Protect Trans Kids tote bag. I wish I had one nearby to show you, but they're really great, nicely constructed, well made. You want one. And so please submit those questions or, make a contribution to help support these events. As for the next question, this question's for Kylan. So in my notes, it calls it Southern Oregon Prides, but I believe that it's actually called Rogue Valley Pride, sort of the annual event that happens down in your neck of the woods or has happened in the past. What's something that you've enjoyed or looked forward to with regards to Rogue Valley Pride? And please feel free to correct me if the name has changed and I just missed the memo.
I don't know for sure what it's called right now. It's changed hands a little bit, like who's organizing it. And last year, the Queer Resource Center at SOU was a little bit more involved, but they're always involved. And I think what's special for me about this is marching with the students, like the university students, and how excited and thrilled they are to have this and to be able to sort of walk through our town. And there's so many supportive people in our town. And then seeing who else from the university shows up. So last year, the president of the university walked with us, right? And I think that says a lot when you have people from leadership in particular showing up and being there. So it's really about not just who's in the audience, but who's doing the marching. I think it's important.
Yeah, we're always looking at who's showing up, right? Excellent. Todd, I think it's you. Well, I have a question for Amber. So we understand that Pendleton had their first ever Pride Parade this past June. I'm wondering if you were involved in that or if you know much about it and what that experience was like.
Yeah, I was involved in it. My spouse Tammy and I and our two kids, we marched and we all carried as big of pride flags as we have, and we tend to have a bunch because we've done a few pride events before, and yeah, I think I still have like 20 pride flags unopened, but we brought quite a few. It was fun. There were I think between 50 and 70 people. We marched downtown, and it was exciting to be part of the first ever Pendleton Pride Parade. One of the high school students that's in the Gay Straight Alliance organized it, and I think it went off really well. Jamie McLeod Skinner showed up for it as well. I think a lot of people had fun with it. I know I did. My kids did.
That's awesome to hear. I have a question for the whole group. If folks could talk a little bit about what allyship looks like in your communities. Folks who are outside the LGBTQ community who are trying to be allies or trying to be supportive in different ways, and what that might look like in your different communities or areas. You can just hop in, or I can pick somebody.
This is Pam. I'll hop in right quick. And the main reason is like allyship for me right now, especially over these last few months, have meant so much more. It's been a difference because allyship can come in a lot of different forms, and I've always felt able to be myself in Oregon and to be out in, a gay person in my job. I've never had any issues there. But recently, with the racial disparity in this country that has gone on, it's taken on a whole different meaning for me personally. And to see my white LGBTQ friends and family support and the things they have said in social media, and it has brought tears to my eyes on many occasions. And to see people that have just opened up and can say Black Lives Matter without hesitating and being able to explain it to other people and trying to get them to understand it doesn't have anything to do with other lives not mattering, and just trying to explain that. So allyship, you know, like I said earlier about going out in the public and asking for sponsors for Capital Pride, I found that we had a lot of community support and a lot of allies for the LGBTQ. But when you brought up this question, it just brought something else to me right now because of the support that I have received from coworkers, from people in the community, from my friends from the past board of Capital Pride and everywhere. Just seeing the positiveness that's come out of this has really done a lot for my personal heart and just to see what's going on in the community. So it just means so much. And people don't know some of the things that they can say can pick someone up, because you never know when somebody's been just in the dumpsters and just not feeling good. And then you read something or see something and say, they get it. They're on my side. They really, really get it. It just does your heart good. And so that's just my little take on that for right now.
Gosh, it sounds like it's been so healing for you. I'm so glad to hear that.
It has.
Wow. Good job, Salem allies. Anyone else, sort of what allyship means to you right now, or within your community, or what allyship can look like?
Well, for me in Prineville and the Bend area as well, I actually work at Subaru of Bend, which is a huge sponsor of the Pride celebration. It used to be Central Oregon Pride, and excuse me, it is now High Desert Pride, and it really feels, I don't know, I feel a lot of pride in my employer for being such a huge outspoken supporter of our local LGBTQ community. And like I also mentioned, the PFLAG groups, because I feel like when allies speak up on our behalf or help when we need to find our voices to speak up for ourselves, I feel like everybody else that's in the community will kind of listen in a little harder. If they are listening to another community member that maybe doesn't fall in the LGBTQ plus group, but they're like, oh, well, this person is fine with them. They seem to know a lot about the topic or the subject matter. And I feel like they're more likely to listen to the topics or the issues that are trying to be discussed.
This is Kylan, and I would definitely second that. I think about in rural areas where people don't feel safe to be out, the importance of allies in speaking up for others, centering the voices that need to be centered. And I think about some of the changes around healthcare in our area are really being pushed forward by allies because their voices are heard or listened to more. And I also really like the idea of an accomplice, right? So we need allies, but we need accomplices too, those that are going to really dismantle oppressive systems. And I think about what Pam was saying too. We can talk about like cis-sexism and heterosexism, but we've got to talk about racism. We've got to talk about racism in our community and outside, and how all those systems are interconnected, right? We can't just deal with one. We really need to see how those are interconnected. So I like the idea of allies are really important, and we need those that are going to go even more so.
Thank you. I am hearing lots of comments around allyship for folks who hold varying identities and intersecting identities, and that's really exciting and powerful to be hearing about. I'm so grateful for you all for bringing that to this conversation. I wanted to mention something that just surfaced for me that I want to maybe dig into and get y'all's thoughts on. I've heard Pam and also Rob mention this feeling that has happened when their employer, a company, a business, has stepped in to sponsor and support the work. For folks living in cities, I think there's often this kind of narrative of frustration about Pride becoming too corporate and businesses taking over Pride, and it's supposed to be about the community. And it seems like for y'all, or at least for some of you, there's sort of this different feeling of this company that employs me and my friends and so many people in my community, Subaru is a huge employer out in Bend, is stepping up and saying, no, here, we're with you. And it has kind of a different impact than I think it does for folks in the city. And I wonder if anyone on the call, maybe someone who's already talked about this or someone else wants to kind of speak to that.
I know here in Salem, we've heard that a couple times where what you just said, the corporations are taking over. And sometimes, a lot of people come back and say, well, all of this wouldn't be possible if we didn't have those corporate dollars. I mean, sometimes we can't put on these events because they don't understand that to rent the park and to hire the musicians and to rent the tents and all these things come with a price tag, and the money just doesn't fall out of the trees, and say, here you go, put on your event. So we try to explain that. And I work for a huge bank, and they have been the title sponsor for Capitol Pride for quite a few years. And not only did they put money behind it, but they put people behind it. We have 20, 30, 40 coworkers show up on Saturday to volunteer their time to help raise those tents and to work at the event. And a lot of people have a negative take on it, but most people understand the need. If you want to have a nice event, sometimes it's going to take the corporation. But I also remind them, to go with your question, this corporation employs LGBTQ people, and we are part of that company too. And they respect us enough to support us. We have rights at that job. They defend us, and they do a lot in the community, not just for the Pride events, but a lot of marginalized communities. And I was just wanting people to recognize that it's not just a corporation taking over, it's them doing their civic duty as well and putting money back into the community. So that's kind of my take on that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Exactly everything that she just said. I wouldn't even say that anybody could say that Subaru was taking over the Pride. We basically just sponsor it. We throw that big corporate money at it. We usually just set up a booth and we give away free swag, but at no point during the whole production of Pride do we steal the microphone or plaster our business name all over everything. So yeah, I think that it is important for people to remember that such a huge celebration does take a lot of money to pull it off in the manner that it has been in the recent years.
I think too, like one of the different, so I grew up again in Vancouver, Canada, and Pride is pretty big there, right? And sort of thinking about that was some of the critique too, is how corporations are taking over. But when I think about rural areas, the difference is sometimes Pride is the way that you find out which organizations and which corporations are actually LGBT friendly, right? And I think what Pam mentioned too, like this is their chance to sort of see how do they treat their employees, right? What are their policies and their procedures, and where do they spend their time and money? So it's actually serves as sort of an educational piece for people to a resource.
Excellent. Thanks for that perspective. I think it's a little different one than kind of makes its way into the dominant narrative, and I really appreciate it. This experience of making sure that folks show up, that these companies show up, and I really appreciated Pam's story about, it's not just throwing dollars at it, right? It's also that people show up and help set up the tents and help make the event actually happen. That's an incredible perspective, and I super appreciate it. Todd, did you have a question you wanted to pose to the group?
Sure, absolutely. What are some of the things that you would like to see change for your community in the next 5 to 10 years? What are some of the dreams that you have for your LGBTQ community in the rural area for the next 5 to 10 years?
I would love for everyone to answer this question. So we can just go alphabetically maybe, or I can call people out, but I think I'm going to lean into alphabetically and start with Amber.
Who's first? Was that me?
Amber.
Find the unmute button here. I would love a continuation, build on that, our annual parade, and to see more of an annual parade, maybe a get together in the picnic. I think it would be great just to have, when all of this is over, just, you know what, we're going to hang out in the picnic, and we're kind of a small town, so just to hang out, have the pride flags flying, and everybody's welcome to come hang out and socialize.
Excellent. And next up is Claire.
All right, let me find that unmute button. I don't know, 10 years from now, Lincoln County, Newport, 2030. I mean, I'm a starry-eyed idealist that will be, I think, right up to the end, but where, yes, there's a robust pride celebration, but it is something so firmly woven into the fabric of the community that this is an accepting, welcoming community that embraces diversity in every aspect. I know I'm veering a little bit off target, but I think we've all found our comforts during COVID and being cooped up more. I've returned to one of my great loves of my teen years, Star Trek. And I want to live, and a friend told me I already am living in the Star Trek universe where, diversity isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated. And if my community can be one of the beacons pointing the way to that, then I'll feel like we've made a good place great.
Excellent. And then Kylan?
Yeah, so there's so many things, but I think I want to focus on two, and that is, again, we have some great legislation and policies about LGBTQ content in our K through 12 system, and I'd really like to see that happen more in our area and the rural communities. But the big one for me is healthcare. And so Ashland is next to Medford, Oregon, which is a pretty big hub, and it's a medical hub for a lot of the smaller communities, whether it's on the coast or out in Klamath. And we're doing some work now to provide more trans healthcare in the area, so people don't have to travel up to Portland. And what I mean by that is, not just access to doctors to provide hormones if that's the way someone wants to go, but also surgeries. And so I think the more that we can educate folks in this area, the more we can serve as a resource for the sort of broader Southern Oregon community. So that's the big one that hopefully in 10 years will be right there.
Seems like a great goal. Next up is Pam.
Well, as Salem sits right here in the Capitol with the governor and all that good stuff, we get to be right here when all the policies are changed and made. So I hope those things keep happening as they are. As far as the Capitol Pride event, I reached out to some of the new board members, and they said that they want to see the change coming where not only do they celebrate, but they protest and they advocate for others. And that's the biggest challenges for them is to lift up the entire community and be there for people of color and maybe that intersectionality and all of that becomes a bigger part than just a Pride event, because right now they realize that's needed. And I know one of the things that they want to have is a parade. We have a nice day in the park. And I know that's something that they're looking forward to trying to have, or I should say we are trying to have, is a parade that leads us to the park for our celebration in the park. So that's one of the goals that I know they have, is to make sure that that happens in the future.
Great. And next is Rob.
Well, yeah, fortunately for me, being further down the alphabet, everybody has basically covered all of the things that I would have said. We in Primeville, we have, we've done a little get-together barbecue thing in the park, and this year with the march through town, obviously we would love to have actual Pride celebration where it was a bigger, more grandiose thing. So in 10 years, I can see that's totally on its way. We got our foot in the door with the march this year, and seeing the support from the town. And then I also think that the medical field can really benefit from getting more trainings in Primeville. I know that I have worked with some agencies in Bend to get a little bit more training as far as healthcare issues with LGBTQ plus, and doing sensitivity trainings and whatnot. But I think that if we can bring it even closer into Primeville, it would make it more accessible for people that maybe can't make a trip to Bend. It's only like a 45-minute drive, but for some who maybe can't afford to travel or don't have a vehicle, I think it would be much more accessible. So just that kind of community support, all of us surrounding each other with love and doing what we can to help the community grow with us. I think that's what my hope is for the next 10 years.
Awesome. And, with my name being Todd, I understand the curse of being at the end of the alphabet.
So I have a question, and it may take you a minute to think through this, so I will understand if there's a little bit of silence here. But every community comes with its challenges. That's true in rural communities, that's true in urban communities. There's this narrative that things are easier than the city, but for folks who live in cities, we understand that living in a city brings its own challenges when it comes to being an LGBTQ person. There's this sort of perception that it's harder out in rural communities to be an out LGBTQ person. And I'd like you to speak to whether you feel like that's accurate, but I also would love for you to speak to what kind of challenges folks are having in your communities, who are people who are trans, people who are LGBTQ, what kind of specific sort of difficulties that people have, whether that's accessing healthcare, whether that's accessing education, whether that's family support, whatever the case may be. I'm curious about what's going on in your communities. I won't make everyone answer this one, but I'd love to get some thoughts from y'all.
Well, hi, it's Claire. And even though others have touched on this, I would say definitely access to trans-specific and trans-friendly healthcare here is a big challenge. A little over 2 years ago, when I made the decision to transition, working with a therapist in Corvallis, I really wanted to get started on hormone replacement therapy. Once you make the decision, whether it's been building up in you for years or decades, of course, you want to start. You don't want to start today or next week. You want to start last week. But the nearest provider that I was aware of was with the Benton County Health Clinic in Corvallis. They told me they were something like 4 months out for a new patient appointment. And then, just discovered by accident, when my therapist went to advocate, said, no, we're shorthanded. We really can't get her in any sooner. But if she's willing to go out to Alsea, of all places, and I find a lot of people aren't even aware of Alsea. It's not an incorporated city. It's special, between Waldport and Corvallis on Highway 34, but this nice little rural health clinic where there's a nurse practitioner who's had training and is super affirming, and I've been able to connect a couple of other people with her, but that's when I find an individual, whether it's for themselves, for a child, a family member who reaches out to me, that if they've done any research at all, they see, well, gee, if I'm in Portland or Seattle or somewhere, I've got plenty of options, but really, just don't seem even aware of where to begin in a rural community like here on our coast.
Thank you, Claire. Anyone else want to speak to sort of specific challenges that come up in your community? We know that accessing healthcare outside a metro area is really, really challenging for a lot of trans folks. It can be challenging in a metro area.
I could talk a little bit about that. So I've been working with someone on a qualitative research project, specifically on trans experience, partners of trans people, thinking about like trans kids in the Southern Oregon, Northern California area. And I think some of the biggest things that come up is the extent of poverty. There's a lot of poverty in rural areas anyway, but how that's greater for LGBTQ folks. And well, again, like we live in this blue state, which has some great policies with OHP covering trans care, for example. It's again that access. And I know there is that sort of divide with sort of this judgment, I think, sometimes with rural folks, well, why don't you just move to the city where it's more accepting? And what that doesn't get to is people's connections with particular like environments. And the interesting thing for me was hearing from rural folks about how there's sort of this live, let live mentality, right? I don't want to hear about your personal life, but you're my neighbor. You're okay. I'll help you with moving some stuff, but as long as I don't hear about it, I'm good, right? And so there is, I don't know if I'd call it tolerance or acceptance, but there is to a level. However, what I do want to bring up is, especially in Southern Oregon and Oregon as a state overall, is how whiteness and white supremacy intersect with that. So while it seems to be relatively acceptable for white LGBTQ folks, it is not for folks of color. And so I think really paying attention to that, again, that kind of intersection.
Thank you for surfacing that, Kylan.
I think I have a couple of different issues that probably are starting to surface, and I'm hoping that I'm totally wrong, but it's as I have young children, and then there's all of this, and the kids wanting to do a lot of the after-school activities and be involved with other kids, and then it's like there was like this year. My oldest daughter was Skyping with one of her friends, and her parents wanted to kind of Skype with us, and then they Skyped with me, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, I can't talk to you anymore. And so I'm kind of, yeah, there's the medical issues and all that, but then you've got this kind of community that might be, and yeah, that's about all I want to say about it. Just, I'm hoping that I'm wrong, and I'm hoping that once we get through this, that the kids will be there. I mean, we're very active in the school and with the school principals and counselors and all of that, and hoping that doesn't get transferred onto our children as they're going through all of this.
Thank you for that. Engagement with schools is something that I think a lot of rural communities are trying to figure out how to manage. I know that as we work with rural community schools that have students who are coming out as transgender in elementary school and middle school, a lot of schools are just trying to figure out how to handle that, right? Do we send a letter home to parents? Do we want to support this student? And it's just like something that hasn't come up before. So thank you for that. I think that's a slightly different tack from what you were talking about, but the concern around what is happening with schools very present in a lot of communities that I've worked with. Anyone else want to offer some thoughts about specific challenges that have come up for you in your community?
Yeah, for me, I think that just education, not just in schools, but just with community members. It's really hard to teach people any topic that they're not willing to learn if they're closing off their minds to a specific topic based on, maybe these predetermined ideas that they have, that they were raised with. I do feel strongly about the schools and the education that is happening, although I still feel like in Prineville, we're like a decade behind everywhere else in Oregon. And maybe these other rural towns can identify with that as well. But I just feel like we're so far behind the times that we have a lot of catching up to do. But I do feel like our youth are going to be the ones that kind of push the older generations through to understanding and being more accepting and supportive.
Thank you all so much for all of your thoughts. I have just a couple of things to say, and then I'll turn it over to Todd for our closing question. We're right about at time now. So a couple of notes. So Denise Torres won the tote bag for this evening's Queer Town Hall. So Denise, I hope you're still watching. Either way, please make sure you go to the form that we linked in the comments and put in your information so we have your address so we can mail that to you. The second thing that I want to mention is that this is our last Queer Town Hall for a little bit. We've been doing these weekly since April, but we're going to take a little bit of a hiatus in August because we are ramping up for our annual Statewide Action Summit, which typically happens on a Saturday sometime in the fall. And this year is going to be held virtually over the course of about a week in the middle of September. Want to put a plug both to the folks on this call and people in your communities and people who are watching. We're going to have a call for workshops that will be going live soon. Our theme for this year is 2020 on fire. So we know that folks are fired up, and we also know that the world's kind of on fire right now. And we'd love to see workshop proposals that can be creative. They can be lectures. They can be hands-on. They can be poetry writing. You know, we're excited to see how your fires have been lit this year and what you want to share with your statewide LGBTQ community in Oregon. So would love to get folks help making sure that the word gets out about that event. Would love for folks to consider presenting a workshop. But now we're going to wrap up. So thank you all so much for being here. Todd, what is our final question?
Our final question for all of our panelists is a real quick go around to everyone to take our last few seconds here to tell us all about your favorite Pride memory from the past. And we will go in alphabetical order, just to make things easy. And so our first up will be Amber, your favorite Pride memory from the past.
So I guess my favorite Pride memory would be Portland Pride. Probably it was 2008 when I'm riding with the bikes, the motorcycles, and somewhere in the crowd, somebody shouts, "Go Pendleton!" So it was pretty cool that I haven't been in Pendleton that long, and somebody in Portland knew that's where I was from.
Awesome. And what about you, Claire?
Oh, tough call, but how about if I say the 2018 Portland Parade? I mean, that was just so overwhelming, and to be in the middle of so much positive, loving energy. I remember one street corner with those bad imitators of the Westboro Baptist Church, but that was just an annoying little blip in what I thought was just an amazing ocean of positivity. And I finally
That's right. Claire rode in a convertible with us. Sorry, say that again.
And I was going to say, and I finally got to do the princess wave I had been practicing for a long time.
Yeah, Claire rode with the Basic Rights Oregon contingent in the 2018 Pride Parade as an elected official. So really, really nailed that princess wave.
right, next up is Kylan.
Well, I think for me, it's still my first Pride, which was in Vancouver, BC in 1991. So that ages me a bit. But just sort of being newly out and seeing so many people there, thousands of people there. And while there was some conflict with people trying to protest, it was overwhelmingly positive and loving and just so exciting.
Awesome. And Pam?
Well, I'm just going to have to break the rules here, and I'm going to have two. Because several years in the Portland Parade, I haven't mentioned, I said I worked for a large bank, but this would tell it all. I got to ride on top of the stagecoach. And so that kind of tells you which bank that is that I work for. And I got to do that, and that was awesome. And my best memory, I think, in Capitol Pride here in Salem was when Darcel was on the stage, and to seeing the audience and the people just, she had never been here before, and I couldn't believe that. And she had never performed at Capitol Pride, but having Darcel and Poison and all that group come down and seeing the people line up to take pictures with her, that meant a lot to me, to see that we had done something really great for this area, and people were so happy.
Awesome. And last but certainly not least is Rob.
Yeah, I think I'm going to break the rules along with Pam. It's really hard to just place one Pride as your favorite, but one fond memory that sticks out for me is when I took my son to his very first Pride. He was 5 years old, and he wanted to have a picture taken with the Dykes on Bikes. It made his day, and also just watching his face witness all of the love and support and all of the bright rainbow colors of everyone walking through the park at that Pride. But it is really hard to beat this last Pride March for Prideville, because I was standing at the back of the group of about 50 people, and I was holding a speaker, playing some music. I just had kind of a gay playlist, and walking behind my brothers and sisters of the LGBTQ plus community in Prineville, which I never would have imagined would ever happen. So that is pretty monumental in my mind.
Awesome.
I'm gonna break ranks with Todd and say that Todd and I should also share our favorite Pride memories.
That's not necessarily breaking ranks. Go ahead.
Oh, but I have to go first because I said so. So I dated a girl. I was perceived as a girl for most of my childhood and adolescence, and I dated a girl, my first ever queer relationship, when I was in 9th grade, and we actually had to be secret about it. We couldn't acknowledge that we were dating because her family was very conservative. And so fast forward about 10 years, and that ex-girlfriend from when I was 15 actually came up to Portland to come to Pride with me. And I got to have her at the parade, marching with Basic Rights Oregon. It was very, very special. And the night, I think it was either Friday night or Saturday night, we went out to a really big queer dance party that was, very raucous and really sort of like shocking performers and lots of wild stuff happening. And Sarah, this young woman, turns to me and said or yelled, because it was really loud, "This is exactly what my mother was afraid of." And that is my favorite Pride memory.
I think that one of my many favorites was many, many years ago. I lived in San Francisco for quite a length of time, but many years ago, in what was definitely a different life, I attended the Dyke March for several years in a row, and had a huge group of friends that were wonderful, beautiful people. And at the Dyke March, there was a big tradition for those of us who lived in the Mission and our little pod of friends, that we would set up camp the morning of. You had to get a good spot. You drag a couch there from somebody's apartment and a tent, and you'd set up and you would drink all day and eat all day and just have this horrible amount of fun. And then everybody would go on the march, and you'd have to circle back at the end of the day to retrieve your furniture. And I had so much fun. It was so great. It was my first summer in San Francisco. And in case you haven't noticed, I'm quite pale. The next day, I looked like a terrible, terrible lobster, but it was very much worth it. So,
I think that's a good mental image to close on.
Is lobsters, yes. Thank you again so much to everybody who joined us today. Have a wonderful evening, a wonderful August as we start into that month in just a few days. And we will see you all when we begin again after our hiatus. Thank you very much, all.
Have a good everyone. Happy Pride.
Bye, everybody.